Welcome to the Establishment Committee session for the 16th of September. I'm joined by Miles, thank you, and Andrew Walton is an apology today. On the agenda is really a deep dive in summary of my conversation with a representative of Consumer Affairs Victoria about the, this section 115 of the Corporations Act and how that interacts with at least the Victorian legislation. So after our discussion last week, I hastily got into drafting the resolutions and organising the general meeting of members. So that notice will go out shortly for the general meeting on the 14th of October. Because a special resolution, which is 75% of members, need to approve for the association to register as an incorporated association before we can apply. Now, just talking through that process, I'll give the summary and then we can go into each part. First of all, it was a horrible experience. I was on hold for close to 45 minutes the first time and got through with a very muffled voice. Sorry, not just the representative was a muffled voice, but the prompts, all of the auto prompts, it sounded like I was talking to Darth Vader, which I had to check whether the number was the official number that I called, and I had to strain very hard to hear what the prompts were or what was being said. So after waiting for that long and then not being able to clearly understand, I had to say to the person, could you call me back? And all I could understand was no. And so I had to hang up. Again, another 30 to 45 minutes on hold, and I got through to a representative. And after a minute or two of talking, the line cut out. And then finally, a third time, again, another 30 to 45 minutes on hold before I got through, I could have I had a decent conversation that wasn't cut off. So that experience alone, I think, is worthy of note, just to let people know at least to reserve a couple of hours to be able to get through on these sorts of phone lines. But when I got through, the discussion was helpful. The representative was really good. She explained that despite Section 115 of the Corporations Act, which is the federal law, all the Consumer Affairs Victoria is concerned with is their act, the Association Incorporation Act, and that requires, in order for an association to request or register to incorporate, it must have a minimum of 5 members. Now, this is the one that, and there's no maximum. So that's a key point for DAOs, particularly in not limiting any of their membership if perhaps they can fit in under this not-for-profit form of incorporated association. So our rules I had modified. I reduced the number from 5 to 2. So in one of the special resolutions proposed for the general meeting is that we amend our rules to increase the minimum from 2 to 5 to tick that box. I might pause and just say, if it's easier to have a discussion on each point, just raise your hand and we can jump into a discussion as well as we go through. So I really tried to understand whether there was any early engagement or advice support provided by Consumer Affairs to aspiring DAOs that want to incorporate their associations. And I was flatly denied that there is no resources to provide any of that early engagement support. The strong message was that to increase an association's prospects of success of successfully registering, that is a matter for private legal advice. So again, noteworthy that the regulatory body doesn't offer any form of support other than the information on their website. and a startup association has to at least have the money to pay for legal advice on these matters. The interesting part, though, was once an application for registration is received, if part of the rules, and you need to provide a copy of the rules of the association, if there is something in those rules that the Consumer Affairs Victoria or the registrar is minded to decline, they're not happy, for example, with some of the clauses that might suggest the association is not being carried on for a not-for-profit purpose, they've said they won't decline it flat out. They will engage in correspondence to say, these are the clauses of concern, you know, have a think about how you might like to amend them, go and get legal advice, and then come back. So there is a form of early engagement, but you need to register, you need to apply to register first. And that's an informal practice that's not written anywhere. So it may not always be observed. That may be a thing that changes per registrar or per supporting body. So you can't necessarily rely on it. All going back to get legal advice up front. Now, the other interesting thing was, I said, what if there are associations out there that should register to incorporate, or should at least go through the purpose to stress test whether their rules mean that they're being carried on for a not-for-profit purpose or not. And the representative said it's not within the purpose of the Association Incorporations Act or any law that applies to how Consumer Affairs Victoria runs itself to go out and sort of seek to identify the associations that should register to incorporate. It is a matter for the associations to choose to register. So there's no, as far as the representative is concerned, there's no active obligation upon the state body to scan the market in Victoria and sort of check whether the objects and the requirements of the Act are being observed. And so I then jumped into the federal jurisdiction, and I said, well, are you aware that there's this section 115 of the Corporations Act and that limits an association forming for the purpose of object or gain of its members and to have more than 20 members? And she did mention she was aware of it, but that it's just out of sight, out of mind. I then asked, is she aware, or would she be able to ask her team if they're aware of ASIC commencing any investigations of associations that maybe reside or that were formed in Victoria, where ASIC has the suspicion that they've got the for-profit purpose and either enforces the liability provisions under the Corporations Act or encourages them to go through the process with Consumer Affairs Victoria to see if the state registrar is happy or is comfortable that there is a not-for-profit purpose, because that would be the alternative or the independent body that also needs to consider whether there is a for-profit or not-for-profit purpose. The answer was no. So I asked it a few different ways, and it all brought back to this gap or this lacuna where it seems that ASIC is not actively enforcing Section 115 of the Corporations Act. And if it were to, it's also unclear what kind of process would entail if the relevant association then went to Consumer Affairs Victoria to say, well, do you have a point of view on whether, and then do we get into a position where the state registrar is in dispute with the federal regulator? And I wasn't sure whether there were any anti-overlap or priority provisions which say ASIC's view would always prevail. So I I was very amused by this process, because without enforcement action, and it's not necessary that good law or good precedent is made through these enforcement actions, but with a lack of them, the market, perhaps rightly, has this legitimate expectation that certain activities are okay if there's no active enforcement action to stop. And this goes to the administrative law arguments around legitimate expectation that you've relied on to your detriment. Again, federal law rather than state or administrative law is federal. So I'll keep going because there's more gold nuggets here, if you can imagine. The other alternative offered by the representative was that to try and get some sort of federal reach of your not-for-profit association, usually the more streamlined process is that applications are made with each state and territory body to register as an incorporated association, but then there is a concurrent registration to be a charity with the ACNC, and so that reporting regime switches off essentially the need to report to or have the disclosure as required under each in the state and territory laws. Apparently, reporting through the ACNC is sufficient disclosure that meets all of the state and territory requirements, so is the only one required if you are this registrable body and you go through the ACNC. Now, I haven't had the chance to actually go through each state and territory's laws and compare it to the ACNC regime. Miles, I'm hoping to go to you to see if you've got some insight on this particular process. But again, that relies on you not just being a not-for-profit, but also getting to that charitable status to get any national streamlining benefits. Now, Electra, you having gone through the direct process with ACNC for Digital Playhouse Foundation is I think a more streamlined route again, because you've incorporated your company limited by guarantee at the federal level rather than having state and territory based associations first that have each incorporated.
Yeah, I'm not really aware of the state issues, but I didn't really want to exist in a silo with Queensland state rules and figure out the rest. So we thought federal was best, and we don't know about the international issues yet until we come to them. But yeah. It took 9 months for us to be approved with ACNC. It was quite a
arduous process.
I don't know how you'd go saying it was for a DAO.
Yeah, that's right. So it could take a lot longer.
We weren't explicit about that, just to be clear. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and Andrew mentioned earlier that it takes a few months also to register as a co-op. So when we're comparing regimes, you know, initially we thought as a startup it may not make sense to go through the co-op regime because you've got such a wait period before you can register. But in this case, it seems like even at the federal level to get to that charitable status, or in the state territory to go and register, it's still, you know, 6 months plus kind of wait period before you can actively engage your community and start advancing your not-for-profit and charitable purposes.
So there are no sort of government level committees investigating DAOs. I mean, there are DAOs are happening. People are doing it anyway. Is there no one who's leading the
well, Treasury at the federal level, Treasury have their crypto task force, and they've got a number of things they're working on, like the token mapping. They'll receive the input from the Board of Tax Review into digital assets, but DAOs were also supposed to be on their radar. I'm just not sure where they rank in the priority. And at the state,
oh, sorry.
Well, then there is the ALRC, the Australian Law Reform Commission, who Miles may have more information than me, that they may be starting to consider DAOs, but state and territory level, I don't think the DAOs have made it to any agenda or working group. Miles, did you have any insights to share at this stage?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to, this is a mishmash of whatever, frankly. Let's start at the beginning. Groups of people can come together, and provided that they have some limited indicia, they're regarded as unincorporated associations. So usually that, yeah, anyway, there's unincorporated associations. There, to get corporate persona from the state, there are a number of routes, and some of them are usual and some of them are unusual. In every state and territory of Australia, there is an Incorporated Associations Act. That act is basically a simple company law route to give unincorporated associations of community organisations that are not for profit a chance to get a corporate persona, to sue and be sued, name, open a bank account, etc. And if a incorporated association wants to trade in another state or all states of Australia, then they are entitled to do so if they register with ASIC and obtain an Australian Registrable Business Number, ARBN. And that gives them permission to operate interstate, and so they need not become an incorporated association in each state and territory of Australia. So I think that's one of the questions that you're asking. Some organisations go and become a company limited by guarantee, which is a federal corporate persona, which allows you to trade in every state and territory and overseas, frankly. There's probably nothing to prevent an incorporated association operating overseas, but it's not so usual. Some of the other issues that I heard mentioned were if you become a charity, then you have streamlined reporting. I think this refers to incorporated associations, which are also charities, had to lodge accounts in two places: to their incorporated association authority in each state, or in each state, in the state or territory they're done, and the ACNC. In order to streamline reporting, it makes sense that they only need to report in one place and that one place is the ACNC. However, not all incorporated associations are charitable. So in Queensland, the level's about 13% are also charities. So chances are that you're not a charity, and so the ACNC route wouldn't be available to you. The other issue that comes up here is what is a non-profit organisation? And whilst it's fairly clear in legal theory what is a non-profit association, it's an association that has what we call a non-distribution constraint in their constitution. That means that the organisation is constrained not to give any of its resources to its members in the form of a dividend or share of profits. And that any surplus made is used solely for the purposes of the organisation. So giving money to members is not usually a purpose of the organisation. Where the issue comes in legislation in each state and territory, and they're not uniform, but they're a little different, is in respect of what a benefit to a member is. And so each have different formulations of how you tell the difference between a member using their sporting club's playing fields or change rooms and giving members a share of the profits made from the sporting club canteen or poker machines. And there is a spectrum along which there is a sliding rule about how you determine that in law, and it differs between state to state. Victoria at one time had a very odd formulation of doing that, which has been mitigated by legislation. And Northern Territory has some peculiar rules about that. So you've got to have a look in each state and territory about whether giving a trophy to a member or a prize is exempted or not exempted, whether allowing giving people who have suffered a bereavement flowers is a benefit, or whether giving them a cash sum is a benefit. So there's a sliding rule, and it differs between state and territory. Now, where I'm a bit confounded is I don't know what this organisation really wants to do or where it wants to go in the future with respect of tokens, market caps, yada, yada, yada. But I know in the life cycle of organisations, particularly listed companies, which is probably the prime example, is you don't go from idea to listed company in a matter of days or months. There is usually what we call a life cycle. And it appears to me that this organisation is trying to jump the life cycle steps, mainly because the steps don't exist, but traditionally or practically the steps don't exist. But it seems to me that you're trying to jump too many steps at once. So there you go. There's some comments that I've gathered from discussion so far.
Oh no, thank you. Your wealth of expertise, Miles. But to take 7, like we haven't even launched any tokens yet, and we're 7 weeks in, and our other DAOs will launch their tokens from the get-go. So at day 0, almost, they are a listed entity. They're not just nationally, but globally. So they forced into potentially a listing and public company regime before they've even figured out their mode of operandi and operations. Arturo, did you have some comment?
Yeah. I think that we need to define the differences in terms of the way that we think of listed companies or companies overall. In the traditional space, the process of listing a company is very long. And the reason is because it puts the company or the company shares in a position where they can be purchased by a wider audience, many of them retail audience. In token space, you can you can register a token, which means that you create the token. That token can then be, through the technology, distributed to a wide range of individuals. But I would equate listing the token not with creating the token, but rather registering the token with one of the exchanges where it is easy for a wider audience to find that token and then transact on it without necessarily even knowing who the issuer of the token is. When you issue the token, it's only really through contact with the token issuer that you can really buy that token, unless it's a very big community and they can transact within that community, right? But yeah, if that makes a difference to the conversation, I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, and you're right, because so if I talk about a centralized token exchange listing as the equivalent to a traditional market listing, if the next step back is the listing on a decentralized exchange or the seeding of a liquidity pool. And then the earliest step, which is what you refer to, Arturo, is you need an understanding of the project or perhaps the issuer to get wind of access to the tokens at that earlier stage.
Yeah, in the least, you need to know the address that identifies the token And you need to identify somebody that is willing to sell that token or transfer that token to you.
Yeah. Isn't it? Just to make it concrete for my generation, if you wanted to start a club, you may issue people a piece of paper, which is their pass to the club meetings. Now, it depends upon what attaches to that piece of paper. If it's just a proof of identity that says you're a member of the club and you can be admitted to wherever the club's meeting and you might have a right to vote, then that falls below what I believe is any regulatory threshold. That's fine. It's where you start to attach rights to shared property, or rights to share in a profit or a dividend, or a financial investment that the state seeks to protect and regulate those offerings. So, and again, there's probably nothing really to stop you issuing tokens, but it's what you attach the rights or licenses or whatever you attach to those tokens, which is the interesting part. And again, I don't quite understand what rights you propose to attach to those tokens, which may take you in or out of regulatory thresholds.
The fun bit, Miles, is that they're going to change. I mean, they're subject to change. They're capable of change based on what members who have those governance tokens that don't meet that regulatory threshold, what they decide, which, yeah, it's...
But that would be subject to the Constitution, because the members can't engage in a process to change the rules of the association without the process in the Constitution. So...
And I think that's a fundamental.
And it may not only the process, it may be with a non-profit institution that the purpose will not include, and this is where we go to last week in the white paper, the purpose of the association may not include the intended rule change. And so to do that, you've got to change the purposes of the association, which again, if you're charitable, it is extraordinarily difficult to do without some sort of Attorney General or court sanction. If you're an incorporated association, then you would probably need, there are different rules with each state association regulator about changing your purpose, and it has to be within the ambit of the Associations Act. So there are some purposes which are prohibited. So being a partnership or a company is prohibited under the Associations Act, as well as some other things. And if you're a voluntary association, then you can do what you like as long as it's within the process and is still non-profit. Because once you reach the threshold of being an association in common with a view to profit, then you fall into a partnership. You can't contract out of it. You are it. That's it. Once you're it, that's it. And then that engages Section 115, which says we can't be more than 20 unless you have an exemption.
Well,
and that's why you can have as many incorporated association members as you like, because they're not carrying on business in common with a view to profit.
So, but this is the real tough part for any association wanting to use the ERC20 fungible token standard. If I specify that it can be openly transferable, so we as the centralized issuers, we don't have to approve all of the transfers of our token. The fact that it's openly transferable, it can plug in without our knowledge to lending protocols for which there could be a profit generated, but outside of the purposes of our organisation, but with our token.
Well, in some Incorporated Associations Act, there are prohibitions on trading, but the main prohibition is on sharing the profits with members.
Yeah, and so the pay to rely model is purposefully testing of this, because that fourth bucket of where the pay to rely revenue goes, it may be to make grants, it may be to fund a revenue distribution. So question whether a pure revenue distribution to not necessarily members, it might be a separate contractual joint venture formed at a later time, but it could happen. So it is a possibility that perhaps members could participate in that scheme, but with a different token, not by virtue of their membership interest.
Well, not if you're an incorporated association, you won't be.
So you feel very well. That's the point. You feel very strongly that just by referencing that potential switch on later, that the whole of Lawfi DAO won't pass the not-for-profit test, or the pecuniary benefits test, I should say.
No, no, not at all. An incorporated association may at any time decide to give benefits to members in breach of its constitution or the legislative regime. That doesn't stop it from being an incorporated association. It's just when they do that, they imperil their status as an incorporated association.
Yeah.
So that you could in the future switch on a NFT is all good and well. When you do that, you may be contra the Incorporated Associations Act and your constitution, but it doesn't imperil your status now as an incorporated association until you do that. If you can see that logic.
Yeah, well, and so the takeaway might be for something that could switch on that really challenges the pecuniary benefits test or the not-for-profit purposes of a DAO or an association's rules, further structuring should be considered at that point. And we mentioned the term sub-DAO in one of the earlier sessions, that perhaps that sub-DAO or the staking or the revenue distribution scheme, that's a critical point where you pause and you say, no, this can't continue as part of our whole DAO. This needs to be structured out at the time, so as not to fall foul of the existing incorporated association status. Vic, I'll go to you, and then Miles will come back to you. Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, guys. Thanks. I left my hand up because I wanted to ask Miles a quick question. Taking it back that we might decide to move anything that falls foul of the pecuniary benefits test into a sub-DAO. So taking that back, Miles, what's your position if there was a guaranteed distribution for charitable purposes built into the pay to rely model, and that was decided as something that's static and could not be changed? Would that change your thinking on this?
Again, it depends. Let me just say, there was a famous High Court case called Word Investments with a charity, and a group of Bible translators who are run by businessmen engaged in a whole lot of business activities, including undertaking a funeral parlour, which is still running today, Bethel Funerals, or subdivision of land to generate profits in order to fund the translation of Bibles, which was a charitable purpose. And the court held that that was, in fact, carrying on of a charitable purpose. So it ranges from that to merely say that if you give 100, but it requires 100%. If it's not 100%, then just because you give some to charity doesn't somehow work a ledger that doesn't work the other way. And here's where we come into the younger generation's mixing of social enterprise and social impact and hybrid structures, which don't really work. You're either for-profit or you're non-profit. But there's nothing that you can structure being a non-profit and having for-profit subsidiaries or controlled entities or other entities which give you 100% of their, or even less of their profits. But yeah, they may well pay tax and have other obligations. Liability is an issue. There's also issues about whether, if you're a charitable non-profit, whether you can in fact give over capital to start that subsidiary, because is giving capital to a for-profit a charitable purpose? Is it within your purpose? And then I'd say just for a non-profit, not a charity, is it within your purpose to give capital to establish a for-profit organisation? So we're doing a bit of brain surgery here, folks, and it all depends on exactly you want to do. So you can structure, and Australian non-profits and charities do this all the time. They structure their way around it. It may require them to have several entities. That increases compliance costs. Some may have to pay tax. There are some other administrative things. There are control issues where the for-profit business wants to go off on its own and not be controlled by the parent non-profit. There are an extraordinarily number of issues, but what I do know is you've got to work out what you want to do first.
That was my last question for you. So I really like your explanation of all of this, and I've got to thank you for it, because you make a really complex area of law somewhat digestible, particularly before breakfast. So I appreciate that.
Probably cutting out half the complexities and the other issues, but a normal lawyer wouldn't do, because they don't want to be sued for not telling you everything. But yeah, go on.
My question for you was, you said that like your gut on this is that we're stepping through a number of steps that companies usually go through, the life cycle steps. What if we were to step through those faithfully? Would you say those steps are, and how might you apply those steps to this model?
I haven't really turned my mind to it, but just off the top of my head, I mean, it may be that you just need a base, a legal base. So it may be that you just have a plain old, non-controversial incorporated association or company limited by guarantee. My sense is that a company limited by guarantee may be more applicable, but it doesn't really matter. With just the objects of this organisation is a talk fest to decide how you do DAOs. You know, it's just a talk fest, and then you have other entities that you may decide to do once you've decided what you want to do. To go from zero to full bore and have a organisation that can do anything that will pop into your fertile little brains anywhere in the next millennia is probably just a touch unrealistic, given the tunnel vision of regulators here or anywhere else in the world, in that yeah, they like to regulate little blocks of the metaverse and have wars between each other on who regulates what. So I think you're just being a touch ambitious, but the way that you cannot get yourself embroiled is to go and become an incorporated association, which will give you a legal persona and all the regulatory things, and then you can get on with conducting your talk fest in relative legal safety. And the other option is to become a company limited by guarantee, or just remain an unincorporated association. I mean, there are ways of managing unincorporated associations and the risks attendant to them. So the Labor Party, the Liberal Party are all unincorporated associations. The Uniting Church, the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church are all masses of unincorporated associations. And, you know, the Catholic Church has been around for a couple of thousand years and doing very nicely, and has its own sovereign state in Italy, with untold wealth and members all over the world doing all sorts of things, from making wine and cheese and chocolate to probably they operate a nuclear power plant somewhere if you dig close enough. So it is open to you, but you've got to work out what you want to do. And I think we're still very much in that stage of puddling about. So yeah, that's my views for what they're worth. But I got to say, I'm still struggling at the upper end of NFTs and doovers and da-da-das. I don't really have a clue on how they work, but I do know the bottom end fairly well.
Well, I think you mentioned trophies earlier, and that, you know, we could be falling foul of providing a pecuniary benefit for a trophy, and NFTs could be that. The POAP that each of you received for attending the first DAO Day session, that could be a pecuniary benefit.
Yeah, I think we're jumping at shadows. Yeah, but it could be. I mean, you know, if you open your door and walk out, you're sure to break some sort of law. I mean, if you walk out in your slippers to get the paper onto the footpath, I think there's an ancient law in some states where going in public in soft shoes equates to being a burglar. So you offend some larceny act. So I mean, you know, we'd all stay inside if we weren't going to have a risk. So there's all sorts of archaic laws, and I'm not surprised that there haven't been too many prosecutions under Section 115, because what it's meant to do is to force people to become companies if they're and close off common investment schemes that could take advantage of being an unincorporated association. Although I do seem to remember that there are online share clubs a couple of years ago that were running around as investment pools of unincorporated associations, which use the internet and not being in any jurisdiction that cared, to avoid regulatory prosecution. So yeah, it's a minefield, but go forth and sin bravely, as one of Martin Luther's friends said.
Sin bravely. I'm not sure how that compares with our ethics obligations under the legal profession rules, but
I love it.
But I love the quote. Can I just say as well, the law says one thing, but the tax rules also deem other things, and particularly with unincorporated investment clubs or associations, the tax law, at least in Australia, also comes in over the top, and it says if you're doing that with more than 50 members, despite it being a trust or trust-like, where, you know, there is a pool of property but it's distributed either in fixed units or discretionary basis, the tax rules say no, we don't want that to be taxed like a trust. We will tax it like a company, regardless of what the Corporations Act says also. So it's just something to be mindful of also. As well.
Agree. The definition of an entity includes a body of persons or whatever. I mean, not even an incorporated association reaches a body of persons. I mean, it's lower than that. So I mean, what a tax law says an employee is differs from the Workplace Health and Safety Act. So just about anybody who sets foot on your property is probably classified as a worker. But for tax, that has a very specialised meaning of what a worker is or employee is. So yes, tax is in its own metaverse, and we have lawyers regularly deal with clashes of corporate and tax metaverses, so that's not unusual. And what is carrying on business for the tax office is not the same as carrying on business under the Partnership Act, may not be the same for carrying on business with the Incorporated Associations Act. And carrying on business may not necessarily mean carrying on a business with a view to profit, as it is in the Partnership Act. You can carry on business without a view to profit. So yeah, it is worth
a quagmire.
It is, well, it is worth untangling. Yeah, so, and that's where I go back to my suggestion was that it may be that you need to rattle the cages by trying to incorporate a body in each state and territory, or doing it in fiction at least, as an exercise to find out where the rough rubbing sandpaper is in each set of laws.
I agree.
And then again, you know, what's a DAO? I mean, I've got any number of articles which, one, they all claim to define what a DAO is, and then other articles list 50 different definitions of a DAO, and then others have, you know, multiple various types of DAOs. And I think we're still, it's become a term which has no meaning because it's entered common discourse and it's not a term of art. And I counsel you against using common meaning terms in the community or is in the crypto community as a term of art, because the two don't mix.
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
I fully agree with that, and I think the same issue holds for tokens and NFTs and basically anything that is represented as a smart contract, because I believe, not being a lawyer, that even the smallest, the slightest difference in a feature in one of these tokens, which is just a change of parameter in code, but could have incredibly large legal repercussions afterwards.
Yeah, and I mean, we've gone through rigorously a number of pieces of legislation, and still DAOs or any one of the types don't fit neatly into them, or at least native DAOs, these internet creatures that we don't quite understand yet. So where do they fit sensibly in the legal regimes that we have? We've gone over time, and that's why we've got a number of weeks ahead to keep discussing it. So I'll call for any last comments before I close. Speak now or forever hold your peace, to follow the religious.
Joni, are you heading to the...
Can I just say this is very complex?
No. Okay.
And I've put on my lecturing hat to dumb it down to people who know in the area, but you know, this is not a formal legal opinion that I've given, but I've just some observations as an academic and a scholar along the way.
And they've been fantastic.
Many more ins and outs and compromises and trade-offs that one might make in choosing a structure. I mean, and no doubt Jodi's seen the Lex DAO papers that the Americans have done about creating trusts in the Caribbean tax havens with that's for tax purposes, and then they've got some others for liability purposes. And I mean, you know, they're as complex as any tax abusive scheme that you've seen of interrelated companies. So,
which, can I just say, as a tax lawyer, I started out in the international tax team at PwC, and the way I approach DAOs especially when it comes to legal structuring, is I stay away from cross-border, particularly the tax haven countries, because you need you still need the economic substance there. But even if you have it, if your transaction thresholds are high enough, I think generally that's $2 million. But if you're under a $2 million threshold, you've still got the anti-avoidance regimes in each country. You have many countries to consider for the international transfer pricing regimes and what is arm's length. So it's a whole nother level of complexity, and I don't think enough tax lawyers are involved in the structures to manage regulatory risk. And again, because we haven't had a lot of tax authorities doing reviews on DAOs yet, or cross-border reviews, there's this legitimate expectation, again, arising in the community that it's okay. International tax considerations, I haven't seen a lot of them. I could probably count on my hand how many I've seen that deal with transfer pricing. So that's a whole lot of pain still to come. Definitely.
I still think we'll probably, a solution to this is to go to creation of DAOs in trading blocks like the OECD or trading blocks, which would give it a uniform tax basis and a uniform corporate basis. And the European Union would clearly has done this for all sorts of things, so it may well, and other the other trading block cartels may well come on board. But anyway, it's just flights of fancy. This is a wicked problem that you've got to deal with. So,
agree. All right. Well, anything from you, Arturo or Nicholas? Good to see you joining us.
It's been a fantastic session. We're very thankful to listen to you guys.
Yeah, no, great to have you all.
I know I'm prolonging it, but just when you're ready to talk to me about Discord, I mean, I've got a whole lot of stuff that I've been collecting that I'd like to plug into a shared database for people, and then invite some other legal academics and others that I know to start a quite high-powered discussion as a virtual public place. I know that there are other places like Monash and other places I've seen that are starting to do this, but I've not seen anywhere around the world that's done it in terms of philanthropy, non-profit, which was where my interest lies.
Miles, also being thankful to your time. If anybody else also here wants to go through a session where we will talk about we'll try to talk about the technical nature of these objects and kind of describe them in as much detail as we can. I'd be very happy to do that if you guys think that's helpful at all.
Yeah, I first got to get my video camera working on my desktop first. So when I get to that, I'll take on another challenge. Maybe just simpler to go to Hardly Normal and buy another $20 camera.
But Miles, you're the only one with a proper background, though, so you're killing it there. And look at the rest. I mean,
I've got better backgrounds. Look this one.
What have you got?
Don't go into your personal photo collection, please.
Yeah, no, I have. I've got a personal. Oh, it's not on this laptop.
Oh, look at that! Now you're just showing off.
Nice,
Miles.
Yeah.
Nice.
Definitely don't go into Arturo's personal collection.
All right. Oh, that's
nice.
good.
Okay, nice.
That's the best.
I like that one.
Yeah. Oh my goodness! Off you go. There's your house, Miles.
Yeah, when I go to Canada twice a year, these are the northern lights that I often see when I go to a conference in Canada. So
fantastic.
Love it.
Beautiful. All right, I'm going to call it a close. And Miles, I'll connect with you on the Discord. That's going to be awesome. So thank you very much for your time, everybody, and see you in the next session.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.